We'll start at 10. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will start in 2 minutes, just trying to trace our online panelists. I'll just take 5 minutes of your time, but we'll start in 5 minutes. We'll start at 10. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will start in 2 minutes, just trying to trace our online panelists. I'll just take 5 minutes of your time, but we'll start in 5 minutes. We'll start at 10. Okay. We'll start in 2 minutes, just trying to trace our need a green signal from her. फरीदा स्टार्ट कर दें फरीदा Assalamu alaikum everyone and a very good morning. Timur, we want you to turn your video on if you're hearing us. Please, we've tried to WhatsApp you. That was not working. Okay, so I welcome you all to this panel discussion, which is a pre-conference session number 2, which is the session is being held with a set of academics, researchers, and interested participants who are here joining us from faculty and student body. Assalamu alaikum everyone and a very good morning.
Assalamu alaikum, Rabela, you have to allow me to open my video.
Okay, let's just sort out a bit of the technical glitch that is there. Just a second.
अस्सलामुअलैकुम ज़ैन, आपको आवाज आ रही है?
अस्सलामुअलैकुम तैमूर, बहुत खुशी हुई कि मेरी जुमा स्टार्ट हो रही है आपकी आवाज के साथ.
नहीं, it's wonderful to see you as well.
So good to hear from you. I hope you've been well. जब तक ये लोग अपनी टेक्निकल इशू सॉर्ट आउट करें, दुआ सलाम आपको, आपकी बेगम को, मुस्तफा को. कैसे हैं आप लोग, आपके वालिद को? How is everything? Good to see you. So good to hear from you at least. I can't see you yet.
अभी इजाजत ये देंगे तो वो भी हो जाएगा. आप अभी इस्लामाबाद में ही आजकल या कराची में?
मैं इस्लामाबाद परमानेंटली मूव कर चुका हूँ तैमूर. आइएगा कभी, प्लीज मुलाकात करें.
हाँ, गाहे आना होता है, मैं बिल्कुल भूल जाता हूँ आप आए. तो
मैं यहाँ हूँ एंड इनफैक्ट तैमूर मेरा अगले हफ्ते 2-3 दिनों के लिए कुछ काम से लाहौर आने
If your mic is on or off, if there is a problem from our end, please let us know. And Timur, we're trying to switch on your video from our end. Please give us 1 minute.
Rabila, I can hear you, I can see you. मेरे तरफ से it's all good.
जी, बहुत उम्दा है.
Switch you till your turn is there to speak, and we're going to sort Timur's thing. Why is he not? Why aren't we seeing him?
तैमूर पैनलिस्ट के तौर पे इनवाइट करें तो शायद उससे फर्क. Here he is.
Okay, he's there.
जी, तो आप लाहौर आए तो आपने जरूर आना है.
आप
बिल्कुल.
चले अब हम तीसरी बार स्टार्ट करते हैं. ओके the more we had it's not okay, anyways, doubt that as well. Third time, I welcome you all to the pre-conference session 2, a panel discussion with academics, researchers, and interested participants, architects, and students as audience, both online and in person, here on the topic of preservation of regional history. Although the topic was preservation of regional history, last night I thought that it should not be history, it should be preservation of regional histories. So I made that correction in my script. So I'm going to say preservation of regional histories, recovering, revising, and retelling. The main premise of this roundtable is centered around the question of efficiently incorporating regional and local architectural and otherwise histories in architectural education in Pakistan. I'm not saying or asserting the fact that we don't do it, but it's a conscious step towards mindfully incorporating regional histories into our curriculum and making our students aware of that. So there must be attempts made by architectural schools to do so formally and or informally at varying degrees at their institutes by modifying the set curriculum and teach local architectural examples. I know that we do it in NED in all our courses, include local examples, take students to local sites, etc. The reason to have this conference and a concentrated panel discussion is to share these individual and at times isolated cases happening within the institutes and various privately initiated platforms like RIVI and Hastonis. This pilot session is being conducted aligned with the conference at DAP, Department of Architecture and Planning, NED University, as an experiment. We're hoping to have multiple of these as a series in future. Talks, roundtables, panel discussions, concentrated, outcome-based focus groups, etc. Over the coming years, targeted to achieve the same objective, to move towards decoloniality, the IT word today in pedagogy, and discourses of epistemological concerns. This pilot will be a learning process for us and for me as a moderator as well. And I will need your cooperation to make it into a useful rather than a successful event, because success benchmarks are difficult to absorb these days. Okay, so the questions around which we will be centering this discussion are starting off is why should we, or why there is a need for preservation of regional and local histories? Have you all taken any conscious steps to incorporate regional histories in your respective professional endeavors and exercises? If yes, why? If no, why? What are those steps that were taken and what were the struggles, if there, while you were doing or dealing with this incorporation of local histories? Because there are certain obstacles in the way. Sometimes the basic dearth of availability of materials become a catch. So just want to sort of move around with that idea. The panelists for the sessions are Fazl Noor, Faria Amjad Ubaid, who are present here and will be joining us online via Zoom, who are present here, and Temur Khan Mumtaz and Zain Mustafa, who are joining us on Zoom, and they're here. I would request Faria and Fazl Saab to please take their seats, and I'll take like a few more minutes to introduce them, all of them together, and then we'll move to the discussion. Okay. So, starting off with architect Fazl Noor. Mohammad Fazl Noor is an architect with specialization in housing, institutional and community development. He graduated in architecture from Dawood College in '87. And after completing a master's in human settlements and development from Asian Institute of Technology, worked on housing, microfinancing, community development, and social entrepreneurship as consultant to civil society and international aid agencies. Last night I read ad agencies, and that was quite fascinating. Since 2015, Fazl Noor has engaged by Syed University of Engineering and Technology as Associate Professor and Head of the Architecture Department, Architecture and Environmental Studies. Fazl Noor specializes in cultural history, evolution of Pakistani society from prehistory to contemporary times, focusing on architecture and teaching dynamics. Moving on to our very own Faria Amjad Ubaid. Faria Amjad Ubaid is an architect, city planner, and educator working as Associate Professor at Architecture and Planning Department of NED University for the last 2 decades. She has taught courses in history and theory, urban planning and design, advanced construction and design studio, besides leading many initiatives at the university. These include the founding of the History Group 2007, and the History Group is one of the organizers of this conference and the pre-conference session. and archives in 2002. She has researched, spoken, and written widely. Faria's design work have ranged from small products to institutional buildings, interior environments, to large-scale urban planning projects and interventions in the country. Now moving on to our online panelists. Taimur Khan Mumtaz is a senior architect at Kamil Khan Mumtaz Architects. He holds an MA in South Asian Design and Architecture from De Montfort University, Leicester, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I'm sorry, UK, 1999, and a Bachelor's of Architecture from National College of Arts completed in 1994. Taimur is also the founder and founding member and director of Hastaneez Institute of Traditional Studies of Arts in Lahore. Hastaneez promotes the research of traditional art and culture. It aims to provide an introduction to and a greater understanding of traditional thought, including Sufi doctrine and methods, traditional philosophy, metaphysics, and cosmology, and the arts such as calligraphy, miniature painting, classical music, and architecture. The Institute holds study circles and courses in Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad on calligraphy, manuscript illumination, that's called Tehzeeb, miniature painting, classical music, vocals and instrumental bows, Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, traditional and modern philosophy, metaphysics, that is Irfan, and Islamic architecture. And last but definitely not the least, Zain Mustafa. He's an architect and educationist based in Islamabad. He's also the founder of Pakistan's first cultural and heritage think tank, Indus River Valley Institution, or in short, IRVI. Included in IRVI is his decade-plus-old initiative, the Cube Edu Tours, a unique heritage architecture education tourism initiative, taking learning about bioregional shared, again, histories to heritage sites across Pakistan. He pursued a VFA program in environmental design, concentrating on architecture from Parsons School of Design, and completed it in 1993. Between 93 and 2010, that's a long span, he was engaged in teaching, practicing, and learning endeavors all across the globe. From 2010 to date, he has continued to explore and discover Pakistan's rich and diverse history through Edu Tours and expanded on his professional practice portfolio. So I open the panel discussion with Fazal Sahab and Fazal Noor. And the question that I will be asking, and that was shared with the panelists prior, that why should we, or why there is a need for preservation of regional local histories?
Assalamu alaikum and Bismillah Rahman Rahim. I hope it's okay to talk in English about regional and local history. I'm wearing my shalwar kameez, so that balances it, I guess. How much time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay. So why? This is a basic struggle, that why people want to learn history, but they don't want to ask this question, why study history? And for me, it is important that the students actually ask this question, why should we learn history? Should we just learn history because all the history that's related to architecture, or do we need to learn history as history itself? And for me, this question is important because why is because how is the history written? the person who writes history has a bias and looks at it in a particular way. History is never written objectively. There is a subjective thing about it. And so this bias, and for me, for example, I carry a religious bias. For me, many things in history, which is not sort of contradicted by Quran or verified by it, I sort of say, is this right or is this wrong? I can question that. But that which is there, like for example, the Noah's flood, I would take it. This is history. This is part of history, and it has shaped the way mankind is today and the way mankind moves about it. So history is not just an evolution of events and people and, culture. History is the way, is what we perceive how we have developed, and therefore shapes the way we think today and the way we behave and act today. So history, in that sense, the question is, why history? And let me just take you through 3 or 4 of these examples. I was introduced to the term historiography by Dr. Parvez Wandal, and he wrote about English language and the way it has become ingrained in the subcontinent, and therefore shapes the way we think and our access to information and our access to knowledge. And so the English speaking in Pakistan has a status which is higher than the non-English speaking. Although, if we look at regional history, which is very much ingrained in our mythologies, and many of these folklores and stories and people's history, they are not in English. And for many of them, the translation in English is also not available. So the ruling elite actually looks at the local history and regional history from the point of view of the English, of the British, the way they have outlined history of the subcontinent. I mean, in region, I'm talking about subcontinent or South Asia. And in local, I refer to basically Karachi and Sindh. For me, this is what local means to me in that sense. Or otherwise, there is, in teaching history of, architecture in Pakistan, I divide Pakistan into different geographic zones. And like the desert part of Pakistan, or the coastal areas of Pakistan, or the mountain, or the hilly side of Pakistan, or the plateau. So these geographical, or the Indus Plain itself, these geographical areas then define for me what is local. And so the history of those areas have evolved differently. So anyway, coming back to why history, so historiography is an important part. And from there, I learned that how historians actually look at history, and the study of history itself is done. The second thing, why history, is because I feel that there has been very much an intent to preserve and conserve history, and this I picked up very early on during my school days through the Aga Khan Award for Architecture's discourse on how history needs to be preserved, or the preservation of architecture, and the documentation that related to it, and the conferences that were held around it sort of brought out an interpretation of history which was very different from Bannister Fletcher. So I looked at history from that point of view. And it was during this process that Kamil Khan Mumtaz Sahab started to say, we need to de-learn. and relearn. And de-learn and relearning process, I think Taimur is in a better position to talk about it. But for me, during those days and later on after graduation, the Mimaran, and the way the discourses that were held with the Masons and the trips to the Hindu Shahi, the ruins, I might say. So they brought out that how local construction was done, how the masons were organized, how the carpenters were organized. And so that was a history which was not documented. And so that process documented and brought those things out. For me, then, why is one important part of it. The third important part which I learned, and this was also early days, was Arif Hassan in his book Planning for Karachi actually starts with the history of Karachi. And he shows how the city has evolved. And in doing so, he brought out many sources through which he described Karachi's history. And one of them was the memoirs of Naumal Hotchan, from which we actually said Karachi was, as a formal entity, established as a port in 1728-29, and thereafter the fortification of a fortified city and the growth of the Bankers Street and Karachi as a trade center and a transit point became important, and that is there. So anything before 1728-29 is, for me, sort of prehistory of Karachi as a local entity in that sense. And after 1728-29, Karachi gets a name. Before that, Karachi. And so there would be many points on it, but I'm just saying that Arif Hassan actually put history as an important aspect of planning of Karachi. And so this is how he interpreted, and then there were maps that were documented, old maps, and how Karachi grew and how it has grown from there on. The fourth point, which I started to think about, as I mentioned earlier about the architecture in Pakistan course, is students do not think of Pakistan as a part of South Asia. They think of it independently of the subcontinent. Whereas the ancient history that we have, and the Hindu mythology in which the Vastu Shastra and Shilpa Shastra is based, they have a design content to it, and how design should be there, and what is important, and how to express oneself. The order of the subcontinent, we always learned the Greek order, but we never learned the subcontinent order. And so this gave me an opportunity to introduce the student to this order that exists in the subcontinent. So Shastra is actually order. It's how to go about doing things. And so if I said history, then there's one which is prehistory, which we get from geology. Then we have the history, which is geographic history. Then we looked at the ancient history. And so Mohenjo-daro is a part which connects to us through archaeology. And then we look at the history which becomes more political in nature, and then it evolves. And one of the major cutoff point is the 8th century, when Islam came into the subcontinent. And then for Pakistanis, this is the basis of the traditional history. For us, tradition starts with the advent of Islam in Pakistan. So this, and then the British colonial history, which shapes most of our institutions and how we act and think and behave, is and the standards that we have been set with are more colonial in nature. So why history is, and why regional history is, because to move and understand ourselves and how to express ourselves and to express ourselves, because we have forgotten our language. We have forgotten how to speak Urdu or how to speak the local language of the Sindhi or other language which derives from the Palti or the earlier languages. So for me, this is how I look at why should we history, and especially local and regional history. Thank you.
Thank you, Filzab. It touched upon many points. We will further upon them. But now we'll move on to our next panelist. Timur, can we take you on with the same question? Why? Although I know that Filzab covered very many points, but we would want to know from you as well that why should we why should we preserve, or why there is a need to preserve regional histories? There's an idea of identity sort of resonating over here as well. And then there's so many identities that we are not able to reconcile with as well, but we will get back to it. So Timur, the floor is open to you.
बहुत शुक्रिया राबेला.
Timur, can we switch to English? I am so sorry, although we're talking about regional and local languages, but we have some a foreign keynote speaker with us, and she's come here from Turkey, Dr. Suna Guven. So she's in the audience as well. So English would be good. I'm sorry for that.
No, I was going to speak in a mixed manner and have very good precedents for that. And it's in the shape of Allama Muhammad Iqbal himself. He would switch languages and he would say, I've been trained so deeply in Western philosophy that when I have to speak about philosophical subjects, I switch to English, and normally he would speak Urdu. So ये recently मुझे पता चला, तो मैं कहा आपसे भी शेयर करता चलूं कि ये हम लोगों का कंडीशन है. इतने बड़े मुफक्कर का भी यही कंडीशन है, तो हम तो कुछ भी नहीं है उनके सामने. तो इसको रिकॉग्नाइज करने की भी शायद जरूरत है, और इससे we also need to deal with it somehow and think about it. I think it requires. Anyway, let's come to our topic. It's somehow connected, I think, what I just said. But first of all, I'd like to, it seems from the write-up that what we understand by history and is somewhat, anyway, I'll give you my definition. For history as it should be taught in architectural education is not the history which is taught, which is useless, I think. What does it matter? Jahangir came and then Shah Jahan came and this happened and that. That is, I think, quite useless for an architect. I mean, marginally useful. But I think one needs to look at history as encompassing sort of holistically heritage, culture, which then includes thought, language, yani ke philosophy, language, literature, art, architecture, etc. Otherwise, there's no use to teaching history without literature. It's absurd. If you want, and the main question should be, who am I? Just coming to the crux of the matter. I am a Sindhi, I am an Urdu speaking, I am a Punjabi, and that is what nation building is about. It's not creating what we did, probably some bureaucrats and misguided politicians did, was to try to make an artificial nation, which is impossible. So that at the expense of regional identities, the only way for a federation to become a nation is on the basis of your regional identities and languages and histories. So from an identity and nation building point of view, that was, I think, which needs to be remedied as soon as possible. Otherwise, we'll just disintegrate. Because this, wo jo bhi humne banaya hai, ye ek idea of Pakistan, it is empty, I believe, because it's artificial. Khair, this is really an aside. What I would say is that history, if it encompasses a larger canvas, only then is it useful for an architect. For example, history in connection with making architecture has some relevance to an architect. That is just what normally we call architectural art history type history, कि ये form है, ये period है, ये style है. Architect का directly तो उससे ताल्लुक है. मगर ये भी, even that is not enough. There are deeper questions of why look at the past. One connection between history is making meaning. Things are not made in a vacuum. They are made, constructed in a meaning context, in a worldview. Otherwise, once again, it is, in my view, if you want to know me, you won't get to know me by cutting off my fingers and studying them. That's just the outward aspect. The person is not similarly for architecture, there's an outward architecture, the shape of it, but the why of it is more important. Why the shape, why the aesthetics, why the principles of design? That has a cultural, philosophic background, which again is completely missing from our teaching of architectural history in colleges. So this is an important step. Then very sort of at a lower level, but equally important level is that if, now I'm coming to the history which is normally taught, that not having a history is like a person without memory. It's a vegetable. It's not a human being. Similarly, for a nation, if it doesn't know where it's coming from, it can never decide where it's going to go. And so memory is a basic ingredient of identity formation for nations as for persons. So these are just 3-4 whys without which history is not of much use as far as I'm concerned, and therefore students take no interest in it because it has no connection with their practice, it has no connection with their own personalities, it has no wider implications for identity and nation building and pride and strength. I mean, whenever our students go abroad, like Rabella did, and she studied her own architecture, it became a source of strength. And many people, when they go out of the country and then they look at their arts, poetry, philosophy, that's when they discover, we also have something. So why can't our education include the way our languages are in Punjab, in Lahore? I know nothing of Lahore's history. I mean, that's absurd. It's a 2,000-year-old city with marks of all those periods. So, I mean, I don't need to say it again and again. But coming to my next point, because we are talking about architectural education, so I'd like to sort of broaden it more, just not just history, but how is architectural education structured? I think it should be structured around the question, what is architecture? For my own education, the only thing I think I learned at NCA was bubble diagrams and making functional relationship between spaces. Because they were still, partly, there was a hangover of form follows function. But then because of the Aga Khan Award, there was also a regional, so they would give us community health projects in villages and so on. So we did also study vernacular and traditional. But anyway, and some of the better teachers also incorporated a response to climate. Javed Najam Saab was really the only one, unfortunately. But now I'll come to my point. The point is that, and the What I'm going to say is what I learned. I didn't learn it at any college or university. I learned it from Kamil Saab, working with him and in his office, and generally that architecture is not only solving a few functions and then putting up a makeup sort of a cardboard facade on it. This is how mostly architecture is taught. We weren't even properly taught structures, I would say. Anyway, but let's come to what I'm trying to say is, Rabula, आप ऐसे क्यों देख रही? आवाज आ रही? ठीक है, ठीक.
I'm just trying to absorb things and sort of a little happy as well, because a lot of this is resonating with my own anxieties as well, and those anxieties are 10-year long, probably more than that, and they're still going on.
Yeah, Gigi, and I think I also found this opportunity very useful, because I realized that we need to think deeply or more analytically about each one of these facets, and you could have a series of roundtables, because we haven't I haven't thought through each of these elements. If you're going to make curriculums based on these basic concepts, then you have to go deeper into it and analyze the situation. And that can be a very creative process, and that is what academia should be doing. But coming back to saying that architectural education needs to be structured around the question, what is architecture? So I'll now give an answer to you about what as I've learned from Kamil Saab, is that architecture is a response to given use or function for a purpose, the most sort of immediate purpose. This is a house, this is the office, this is the mosque. So that's its function. This is what we are taught at the architecture school. The second is that the building is geographically in some place, and that is climate. It has to respond to that climate. Otherwise, it's irresponsible. It's even criminal, the way buildings are designed, for example, in Lahore, and especially in this climate crisis situation. So how can it be that a designer doesn't incorporate it as an integral part of the design process? Third is the material context. Am I in Karachi using concrete blocks, or in wherever in the north using stone, and in Lahore using brick? So how is it not incorporated in the very process of design? And this is what I learned from Kamil Saab, that you have to incorporate all of these things. This is a unity. And that is the difference between real architecture and what we have around us. Many of the architects who've studied abroad, it's natural, it's common sense. This is how architecture is taught all around the world. And their work, it stands out. Habib Saab le le, kisi ko bhi le le, Kamil Saab ko le le, Najam Saab ko le le, Lahore mein to hai. The material context has to be organically incorporated into your design process. I mean, these are things which one shouldn't even be saying, but they were absent from my education, so I can say that with confidence. Then the fourth thing is whatever is the social and cultural context of, ye bhi obvious hai. Fifth is the historical context. Even, I mean, in every age in the West also, architects were 90, 80, 70% of the architects normally don't just, they are avant-garde architects who ignore the context, but normally, at least let's say 50-50, they don't, they respond to the historical context. Yeah, वो कौन था वो postmodernist जिसने, वो अमेरिकन था शायद, जिसने वो लंदन में नेशनल म्यूजियम की एक्सटेंशन डिजाइन की थी. उसमें काफी कुछ हो रहा था, मगर उसमें एक रिस्पांस थी टू हिस्टोरिकल. सो तो कहने का मकसद है कि you can't, especially in our environment, makes even more sense. And lastly is the meaning context. What are you saying through your building, which is the artistic side of it? So एक तो आर्किटेक्चरल एजुकेशन के हवाले से आप देख सकते हैं कि ये जो 6 के 6 कॉन्टेक्स्ट हैं, they are in a sense not bound by time. Architecture has been responding since the beginning to all 6 contexts. And that is why the great masters went. I'll just end on one example, and being from Pakistan, and one piece of Urdu poetry, वरना तो मजा नहीं आएगा. तो एग्जाम्पल मैं आपको बताऊं, ये मैं ले रहा हूं, this is from 2011, what do you call it? The Architectural Review में ये छपा था, written by William J. Curtis, The Classical Ideals of Corbusier. Who's the father of modern architecture? And what does he say? I'll just read out a little bit. In 1929, the same year that the Villa Savoy was in construction, Le Corbusier, the Pope of modernism, let it be known that, quote, the past is my only real master. His architecture was radical in a double sense, both revolutionary and returning to roots. The Villa Savoy itself is about many things: a utopian vision of modern existence, a machine to live in, a purist language of form, a post-cubist sense of space, a grammar for reinforced concrete. But it is also a distillation and abstraction of classical order, and in some ways may be thought of as a machine-age temple. The meaning to say that architecture works at many levels, and it cannot work without a cultural memory. And here what he was doing, and similarly Khan made his famous trips in search of the fundamentals of architecture. Corbusier, at the age of 24, and he spent 3 weeks at the Acropolis sketching and photographing. He was in search of the spirit of architecture, let's say. He wrote about it. Similarly, and Mies is called a classicist. He wasn't making white houses or anything. He was making the eye section and the glass and everything. But it was quite connected to the... That is why we are taught classical Greek. In our art history, we are taught classical Greek architecture. We never question why are we being taught that? Because for the West, that is their cultural roots of modernity and Renaissance and everything. So they go back to their roots. We are sort of in an amnesia and completely rudderless. We just copying because they teach classical Greek. So we hum bhi wahi padha rahe, bhai hamara as a global citizen to theek hai, magar the reasons for looking at history should be clear. But I'll just end on this beautiful, it's quite famous, most of you might know it, Akbar Allahabadi, probably writing in the 1890s. He was born around the 1840s and he died in 1922. And he was a great critic of the changes which were coming to society, mostly through cultural change, but also, and more importantly, through educational change. Chhod literature ko, अपनी हिस्ट्री को भूल जा, शेख व मस्जिद से ताल्लुक तर्क कर स्कूल जा. छोड़ लिटरेचर को, अपनी हिस्ट्री को भूल जा, शेख व मस्जिद से ताल्लुक तर्क कर स्कूल जा. 4 दिन की जिंदगी है, कोफ्त से क्या फायदा, खा डबल रोटी, क्लर्की कर, खुशी से फूल जा. तो हम इस रास्ते में निकल गए, सर सैयद वाले रास्ते में, और इनको पता था इसका नतीजा क्या होगा. अभी भी हमारी एजुकेशन बिल्कुल फंक्शनल और नौकरी और पैसा, and as a nation you can see what mess we are in. It is because we never dealt with these deeper questions. Thank you.
Thank you more. And I think not as a nation, I think globally we are going toward that, the whole neoliberal economy and its materialistic ethos, if I may. But yeah, there are some very interesting points that were made, and not just you who is asking what are we doing with the classical architecture only, but I think for us it becomes relevant with respect to the colonial architecture that we have as heritage. That is one of the heritages that we have. But also the fact that we need to unpack the colonial architectural remains with respect to the classical architecture in that way, which we probably are doing, but in not too consciously. At least I was not till I have started to rethink about this. That it's been a long time. But we are working, going toward that. कोफ्त भी जरूरी है जिंदगी में, कुछ कोफ्ते take us somewhere. That I have learned as well, the anxieties that I had with architecture of Pakistan and how to deal with it, how an object that is given to me, and all those kuftan anxieties that I got because of my education, because I couldn't understand it. So anyways, so we will talk about this further as well, but those anxieties helped in making sure that I get a grasp on it or understand it. And it's a process that is going on that one brings to the to their classes as well. At least one tries. So I move on to Zain Mustafa, our second online panelist. Then can you? Oh, then floor is all yours.
Rabela, assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum also to my familiar faces on the panel and to our international guests. Welcome to Pakistan. Rabela, it's been wonderful listening to Azal Saab and Taimur, and I have had multiple conversations over decades. I find that one begins with oneself, like all good forms of charity. And in my search for myself, which began in 1995 approximately, when Taimur and I first met, and Hastunis was an idea. And one New Year's Eve night, we discussed calligraphy. And I remember saying to Taimur that before you think you know about calligraphy and bringing the calligraphers on, please do it yourself to understand the soul of it before you imagine and project and presume its soul by bringing these artisans back. It's a wonderful night. I will never forget those conversations. And Taimur, thank you for those memories. Following from that, my own search of my place in history while I was teaching in the 90s, mid-90s happened. And then 2010, it became a shared journey when I started looking at shared histories. And for me, the shared histories are really about the geography. You cannot really talk about political boundaries which have blurred and changed and evolved and have been fluid spaces for millennia. So 12 years into this shared journey that I'm at right now with IRBI, sitting in an idyllic farm, very much connected to the land, away from the noise and vulgarity of urbanity which has failed us, I now have this wonderful opportunity to look at the magnificence of Mother Sindhu, what the river Indus has given to the word India, what she has been before Bharat took over that name, and the empires that she has nurtured. Our histories are not of the subcontinent, with all due respect, to Southeast Asia. They're of the Near East, they're of Russia, they're of China, they're of Tibet, and also of the subcontinent. So I think that our myopism has to be decolonized. We have spent too many years being told by somebody else who we are. I believe the architecture of history is a language that we need to find a new vernacular for within ourselves without the imprisonment of this very language that I speak to you in right now. I'm doing this out of courtesy and hospitality, which is Pakistani for our guest. But ideally, I would prefer to have done this entire conversation in Taimur's language of Urdu, even though I'm not in Fazal Saab's Shabar Kameez, but I do have plenty. So I found, Rabila, that history is a sentient being. It's alive. It's not a memory. It's not a series of ruins. It's not a list or a glossary of a trail of breadcrumbs. And I've only discovered this when with my travels, we call it very rudely tourism. It's not tourism. It's a reconnecting, reclaiming what lies under my feet to the soles of my feet. And I spell that as SOULS. Connecting to a deeper energy level, whether it's the geophysics of ley lines or the oral histories at the custodians of these heritage sites. You know very well, Rabila, that I spend my entire year somewhere or the other between Nagar Parkar and the Kailash. We're at 50 sites, listening to their stories of love and loss and birth and hunger and famine and agriculture and wealth and trade through their music, through their food, through the embroideries on their textiles, through their mannerisms of speaking to each other, how they eat their food when they're together, the relationships between families, and most of all, the relationships that all these people have to the earth, through the animals and the architecture of the buildings that they have lived around for millennia. So for me, our histories that you want to reclaim need to be reclaimed, but we first need to look at ourselves and language. The language that is used to define these, I think the modern masters, as they are called, have really destroyed our sense of self. In terms of architectural education curriculum, there was a Board of Architecture conference I attended several years ago here in Islamabad, entirely useless, complete waste of time. And we continue to have these conferences that are just, I think, decadent and pretentious usage of language. They fuel the fire of intellectual genocide. They diminish creativity and imagination. And we need to go back to a very, very rudimentary identification of a human need in this climate change catastrophe that we're surrounded by. I don't think we have the luxury or the privilege or the time for these pretentious events. I'm not talking about this one particularly, but what I'm saying is that this needs to be part of an action plan. It needs to incorporate HEC. It needs to incorporate academics like yourselves from Russia, from China, from Nepal, from India, from Afghanistan, Iran, Spain, Portugal, Africa. We need to be doing what I believe IRBI is heading towards, is a new conversation for a new narrative, reclaiming history as our own, taking a kind of ownership that decolonizes it from what we have inherited by others who have told us about our history. We take the modern masters and turn them into an elective, just an elective as an option to study, not the main core of architectural design. We take our students to those who have embodied wisdom in their hands, how they build, how they work, how they create. That knowledge does not exist in our linear Anglo libraries. And this is centuries of intellectual genocide and creative genocide that we have institutionalized, which I think the best way to undo is to look at history and the histories of this region as a family and as a living entity, and then create a roadmap for bringing together this non-linear environment of understanding us and our place and our role and our responsibility to each other in this world around us, which is collapsing as we speak. So that's that's my overall sort of today worldview of where we're at. The northern end of Pakistan is not connected to the southern end. We need to come together and celebrate this diversity of language, of customs, of traditions, instead of looking at ego-based I and I. I think we really need to look at even the Indus Valley civilization as our Renaissance. Renaissance cannot be just with the Mughals because of their opulence, their overt and gauche opulence, or that of the British. We need to find people who had understood urban planning, who understood matriarchal societies, who understood empowerment of thought, of social impact through architecture. And we have a 9,000-year history of that minimum. Pakistan's history is just beginning. Karachi's history is just at its dawn. This isn't history in my framework. History goes much further back, where there's a series of deep patterns that we can look at. Everything else from the Mughals till today, I think, is really very similar to a heat rash. It's very, very topical. It's new. And I can't take it seriously. I think until we go back and start our journey at Mehergarh and then move forward, then you've got me talking about something genuinely interested and deeply soulful. Sorry, Rabela, if that's not what you expected, but this is where I am today.
About this session is that I came without any expectations, and a group of people that I have been engaging with. So I am in a zone of probably in my drawing room having a conversation with 4 of you, probably over a cup of tea, which you can all have on your own. So I'm in the best place right now, and then my teacher from Turkey is also here, so it becomes much more comfortable for me. So I'm without expectations, and also actually all of this is bringing so many tensions and I don't know, polarities and everything. I see themes resonating between all 3 of you. The identity, the relearn, we need to relearn. And I'm happy that a group of younger people is here as well, that we need to relearn, and other people are saying that as well, because history, we've not even learned it to unlearn it. We need to rediscover and then learn it. I don't know, it's something on those lines. So it's constantly fluctuating for us, being a monolithic Pakistani entity, and then not being that at the same time. Then how do we reconcile between our multiple identities? In my case, add the gender identity as well. So it's much more critical in the land of the pure. So we will move forward with this to our last panelist of the day, who is in person over here, sort of rounding off. And Faria, so your take on all of it?
Yes.
And the question, sorry.
And another question? Thank you very much, Rabela, for inviting me. I feel really honored to be here. And I think that we've heard, many and very actually deep and powerful things and issues were raised up. So in my case, since I come at the end, and I think by being here, I'm honored, but I think I kind of represent my faculty, all of us who are in the audience, and our students and our department by being here. Now, there are many intellectual responses that one can have on all of these questions, but like you said yourself, that I think I would take another tangent, because I guess a lot of the discourse was directed, and maybe the topic was directed at what personally I've been associated with within the historical domain for the last 2 decades, and basically what a lot of the regionalists and the arguments that the traditionalists, so-called, posit is towards the West, or the Renaissance, or the Roman, or the classical sections of history. So some of my ex-students are here, the faculty members, so everyone is aware that I have always specialized from Renaissance till the contemporary times. But I think that for me, within this dichotomy, personally, I have issues with both the topic, which of course looks at the tagline of preservation, then it looks at the question of region. And so I would have another point of view for that, or which is, I think, very commonly shared. And that is that I think that this world of binary oppositions of East, West, tradition, modern, local, global, I think that ended quite some time back. Our curriculums have changed, not just in this department, elsewhere also. I would like to maybe use this opportunity, kind of share with the people who are not from the architecture department, that I think that for us, most of us, our students, our faculty, we're quite, engaged with, a local, the local context of what we are surrounded with, whether it comes to our research, our teaching, and anything. And probably, I think we're very fortunate as probably one of the few schools that are situated within the historic part of the city. I think there's not a single building that Dr. Anila has not, researched about and shared and engaged the students with those. So I think the contemporary reality of what education is, what it is being practiced within the schools of architecture, within the country, I think we need to kind of update ourselves on that, number one. So here, I was sharing with Professor Gwen in the morning that, many of our faculty members who may apparently have a doctorate in city planning, but we're very happy that most of their researches, they start from a historical perspective. And I think maybe, being part of this culture and society, that is very much the case. Secondly, I think another domain, so for me, I think the now cannot be denied, the now. And I think the now, and for the young, it is not about, the new world, I think, is not about only the world that is right here, or it is right around me within a boundary that I make for myself. I think the war in Palestine has clearly illustrated in the past 1 month that many people, regardless of their skin color, they feel closer to another land that is elsewhere, and that is, that, and there are no narratives that is guiding them. So even I think the material boundaries of what architecture deals with, that has completely altered in the contemporary world. So the question of what is local, what is global, what is West, what is East, what is us, what is them. I think once you take, I would say what Taimur said, that, the purpose of going through this discourse on history is in an architectural school, and we're all architects, because I think a maker, so if you take the stance of a maker, I think you can learn from any object of beauty, and you can learn from any master, be it the, be it Alberti or, or any of the Islamic experts. I don't think they were really far in my own work, I think, and research. I don't think they're very far away from each other. There was a quote on Corbusier's work also. So, but I think it's very important. I think history, at least for me, has been a tool, and I try to engage my students with it. It's a tool to look at and to be close to beauty and to look at greatness. Coming from the kind of environment that we all live with, and the kind of violence that surrounds us, also degradation, I think it is very important to learn that how, those masterpieces were made, what were the footsteps that the masters took to create that. So also here, I think as far as this discourse is concerned, I think that importantly, it has to be a human discourse, and it has to be centered on very local engagement. So personally, for me, I think it exists. There is no I think it's happening, it's already there. This whole question of regional history, so thank you for inviting me. I had to kind of brush my scholarly side last night. So there is this, of course, debate that when you say local and when you say region, will it be the national boundary? Will it be a region that is immediately local? Will the region be made of a collection of locals? So personally, for me, I mean, I think it's regardless. I mean, you just you do seek examples and you try examples from the past, and you also try to understand that how you arrive at where you have arrived. But the future may be either independent or closely linked to that, as long as it is based on a very compassionate and human and considerate view of what surrounds us.
Thank you, Maria. But actually, it was an interesting take. Yours, and I kept on thinking, so when we talk about greatness, when we talk about all of this is right, and that one can learn from anyone, one can learn from good or great. I don't know what good architecture is, that's another debate for probably another time, but greatness and those taking your words. But what about the vacuum that is there in when we try and learning from the greatness of a certain geography, let's say like that, and taking that learning to a side that we've not really reconciled with because we were not taught that, or we were not giving the tools to reconcile with that. So yes, the world is becoming a global village. Yes, probably in a few years, the idea of history will also dematerialize, but that's going to generate further crisis, or it's probably generating, still generating crisis. And then on top of it, in Pakistan, I think we have multiple layers of one crisis after the other. The historical amnesia that was created because of the ideology that had to be propagated for one reason or the other. And then all hell breaking loose from that. I don't think I've ever been to a temple or were taken to a temple as an artifact, as a cultural historical place by anybody, or I would be taken there, but not going in that direction. But that sort of disassociates me or creates that vacuum of connection. And then it sort of starts resonating with the idea of identity. So what is identity? Why can't there be multiple identities? That is something as well. That one needs to think about as well. And as feeling closer to anything that you said, I just recall that we as a nation are feeling closer to other geographies anyways. Hamara Qibla to in the land of green he directed rehta hai most of the time as a nation state, but we are much more than that. I think we need to shift our compass to the local region, but that's my take. But it's a good talk we have had, and we kind of covered the first question that was there, and it's 11:15. I do want to take some input from the audience? Do we have the mic? Before we go to the second question, because there's so many of you here, and I think if there are any comments, questions, input from the audience, so you have, yeah, okay. So we need a mic. No, I think it'll be good if you talk on the mic. It will be recording, and
So I'll just add a question to what has been said. I think that we're very confused Pakistanis as a nation. And I've seen, it's working. Okay, I've seen, I don't know, I've traveled and I've seen people being much more patriotic in other parts of the world. And I've always questioned why Pakistanis are so confused about who they are and why they can't belong to the place that they do. And I think that this has much to do with the question that we are asking ourselves, which is why do we need to preserve regional history? I think this question is a fundamental. So a lot has been said. I think that's all I want to say.
actually, confused Desis is something that is associated with South Asians abroad globally, I think. So why are we confused is because we don't know hamara qibla kahan hai, where the compass points. And so I would, Hojam, if you want to add something to this discourse, yes. And then we'll take some other
thank you to Rabella and all the speakers. It was very inspiring on the one hand, but also very overwhelming. Because on the one hand, it shows that we need to embrace, the world globally. But on the other hand, we also realize that this cannot be done fruitfully if we don't know ourselves. So the journey toward ourselves to know who we are, and then the journey to embrace the world and to build bridges with the world are two equally important things if they are to, converge together. So lately, I've been reading a lot of the Emin Malouf and also Edward Said, because one is born in Lebanon and spent his entire life in France. And the other one was, born in Palestine and spent his entire later life in the United States. And they both have been confronted with this question, who are you? Are you more, American and Palestinian? Or are you more, French or, Lebanese? And Emin Malouf has a very good answer to that. And he says this question cannot be answered because I cannot say I'm more French because I write in French, because I have written more than 10 books in French, because I cannot extradite, I cannot cut off my early childhood beginnings from where I grew up in the small village. That has shaped me. So it was a continuous process, and we always have to be aware of that. So I was very fascinated in similarities and also differences. To start with a very sort of instantaneous, way, Mr. Temur, started his, speech by saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. But then Mr. Zen, Mustafa Zen, he started his speech with Alaikum Salam. So they're also very the local, ways. They are also ways coming from the same world, but looking and addressing in a different, way. So we have to be aware of deep-seated differences, but we also have to be aware of richness which resides in the local. I mean, whether we are local or international, you are different than I am, and I am different than you are. And Professor, Feriha also said something, I think, which is very pragmatic. I mean, she said, we have, bridges with Metu and, Pakistan. Yes. So you are a different person now because you had this connection with Turkey. And you are different than someone who has not been to Turkey. And you are also different than, the Professor, Rabela or Professor Nadim, who have also been in Turkey. So we always have to be aware of our individual personalities. Now, Professor Tamir said that, Urdu is very important. And students, they have to know Urdu, and they have to not forget that language. And Professor Zen said that it has been too long that we've had an intellectual genocide when we have been told by others who we are. And we have to know what we are. And if you don't know who you are, and if you don't realize why you are being told who you are by, others, then it doesn't matter what kind of architectural history, you're taught, because you will not understand it. So the basic problem at the very outset is to understand what the built environment is about. And that's why I love the architectural history book of Spiro Kostov. I mean, it's not a history of architecture. It is a history of architecture, settings, and rituals. And at the outset of his book, he says that this is not just about buildings, but it is about a cultural history. So you can't have a history of architecture without understanding the people, why they think the way they do. And if you don't know the way they think, you will never know why they build the way they do. So at the heart of the question is getting to the person deep inside. And in that sense, I appreciate what the Professor Tamer, said. I mean, you talked about long histories, longue durée. I mean, you talked about, geological history, archaeological history, and the current history all the way to our time. That might sound extremely long, but ultimately it brings us to what Professor Zen, said. I mean, he said, you have to be silent, you have to contemplate, you have to look around, you have to know why your feet are stepping in a particular place. What do you feel when you're sitting and living in a particular place? So all of this, I think, has to be taken into consideration. You must not lose touch with the world, but in trying to understand where your niche is in the global world, you will never be able to do that if you don't know your raison d'etre, why you are the way you are in your part of the world. So you have to begin with that. And it's not simply a matter of, learning Urdu and learning the literature and so on. It's very important, but you have to internalize that. It has to become, part of you. Anyway, I've spoken too long, but it's a marvelous discussion, and I hope you will have many more. Thank you.
We actually are looking forward to have many more of this. We have 26 minutes more to 12. So I would take one more comment from Dr. Anila, sort of take her in the loop as well as the conservationist that she is and what kind of struggles she faces. And then we can probably have a little discussion on another topic.
Yes, thank you, Rabula. All of these discussions since morning, they are really something that we should have done much more earlier. And all four of our panelists have given different takes on why we need to learn history and how we need to learn that. And I think we've been given all of these the richness of knowledge that it holds, and how one can make use of that knowledge and that learning. That is something very important. Like what Zain has said, that he has taken this approach of going into the communities, living with them, and trying to absorb whatever happens, trying to look into the oral histories, which we hardly ever do. I think, and a lot of our oral histories have already been lost. I think that particular approach is something very important, and definitely it is so far missing out in our pedagogical approaches. We try to do that as a department. Like Faria had said, that we have experimented with a lot of things. We have introduced to our students a lot of ways of learning and associating with the knowledge base that we have available locally to us. I think it's very important to have that balance. It's very important to learn, like Professor Goven has said, that to connect with the world, you need to know. And unless, you need to know yourself, and you need to also have a knowledge of what you are interacting with. So whatever part of history we are teaching or being taught gives something or the other to you. And that is something important to understand, that what you can gain from that, and how you can actually apply that knowledge to more meaningful creation of built environments, because our profession is something that gives us that opportunity to actually apply all of that, what we absorb and learn from different forms of histories.
Thank you, Dr. Anila. Okay, so now after narrating a small incident that I had, because I think identity is something that is resonating in the talk as well, to be a global citizen or to be a local citizen. Which history? Probably we sort of moved toward that as well, with Fazal Saab sort of sharing the corpus of history, with Timur sort of talking about relearning false histories. There was something that was resonating over there as well. Then intellectual genocide as well. It was quite a nice word. I'm going to use it in one of my researches with the reference of this talk, myopia, and all of these things came in. So one conference, because I have been flirting with the site of Makli since 2010 now. It was always decided that I'm going to work on the site of Makli for my master's. And later on, when I started PhD, I didn't even have to make that choice. So once I went to a conference, it was by NIHCR, a history institute of an offshoot of Quaid-e-Azam University. So all historians were there. First time I felt at home. Not that I don't feel at home in NED, but that was where I said, oh, I understand what they're talking. So I was really happy there. I had a paper on Makli, of course. It was during, I think, either my PhD studies or by the end of it, by the end of my master's and start of my PhD. And there was a historian, very celebrated historian. I eyed him and I said, acha, inse to milna hai. His name was, I have to meet him, Kurum Qadir. I said, I have to meet him. And I presented that paper. And again, there were the resonance of this identity crisis and all of these things that were going on. And he especially came and met me, and I was on cloud 9. at that moment in time. But what he said was that we were only Pakistanis. I said, why can't we be all of them? Why can't I be a Sindhi by ethnicity? Why can't I be a Pakistani? Why can't I be a woman? Why can't I be all of these things? And sort of, why should I have to choose between being a Muslim, being a Pakistani? Why are they different? They're all me and I'm all them. And that's what he said, that we understood that later. Because, and then I could now relate to what he said. At that time, I was like, why did he understand it later? It's a simple thing. But during their time, when they were growing up, probably the nationalistic fervor was a lot, and they had to disassociate somewhere. With reading about Kamil Sahab and Kamil Khan Mumtaz and all these early architects, Arif Sahab, local architects, Kamil Sahab, Arif Sahab, Mamlari, all of these people, they were trained as modernist architects because their education was in West. And here they felt whatever they felt and sort of changed their trajectories into different directions. What led to that? There must be something that was missing, probably a connection that was missing, probably some idea that was missing, because I feel that there is a connection that is missing. When you say symmetry, and when I study classical orders and classical perfection, which does not really exist, and I go to Makli with all of that learning, Makli does not make sense, as it did not make sense to the colonial writers. They were not coming with the tools or understanding of the Shastras and all of these things. So probably Kamil Sahab and Mamlari and Arif Sahab and all of these people were also feeling these kind of things. And what is the connection? I remember going through one of the YouTube videos of Charles Correa, and he talks about that as well. So let's sort of on this very vague idea of mine, that why can't there be multiple identities, or the problem is with the plurality of identities that sort of creates that sterility in architecture, sort of connecting it with the topic of today as well. And probably that is the reason, like we study sometimes, not everywhere, we study sanitized histories. So taking your word, Hojam, but so let's just talk about the sanitization of history and the conflict it has with multiple identities. And one of those identities will definitely be us being global citizens. That has to be there. We can't avoid that in the present world. So Hojam, Maxi, can I have the mic? And then we can move on to the panelist as well, Suna Hojra, and then we can move to the panelist. So this idea that sort of stemmed from it, multiple identities conflicting with.
Thank you. From people, we are now moving to the actual stuff of architectural history. And I think a problem which remains unsolved is what is studied. It doesn't matter whether it's in Pakistan or Turkey or the United States, but the architectural history textbooks, even now, have been written about more iconic buildings, more well-known buildings. But what makes the corpus of architecture actually is the vernacular architecture. I mean, the local architecture. So this is finding its way more and more into the general surveys of architectural history. But the real problem at hand is to reconcile the vernacular with the monumental before we decide what to include and exclude in general surveys of architectural history. That's where we have to, begin. Thank you, Rabella.
If you want to add something to this question, and then we'll move online to Timur and Zain, and then come circle back to Faria.
Well, one of the thing is that the more questions that we mix together, the difficult it is to talk about it. I feel that before we synthesize, an analysis is required. An analysis means actually trying to frame different questions and try to answer those questions rather than just put all of them together. So if you're talking about multiple identities or sanitized history or vernacular versus a more metropolitan architecture or monumental architecture, I think we need to frame them differently and try to answer them separately before we can put them together. But to come to the first question of multiple identities, I think because identity, as you say, has been running in as a common link within this, I feel architecture design itself is sort of recording history. It is something we are saying that this design is representative of this culture and of this age, and therefore the student, they need to know what they are designing, and I agree that we need to go beyond functionalism and bubble diagram and to conceive architecture as architecture, not just be a building designer, but not just services and functions and circulation, but it needs to be more than that. Architecture needs to touch one's heart to be able to say, "Yeah, architecture." So in that, I think two important facts that when I joined Sir Syed University or the Academy full time in 2015, which is 7 years, and I don't have 20 years of experience. Why did I join? I joined because I felt that the youth of this country, they were becoming violently extremist. And I also saw that they were discontent with whatever was happening around them. And because there was such a lot of rapid changes taking place, and they were not able to manage that. And तो जो youth है, उनकी जो नजर है, वो future पे है. They are not thinking about past. They are thinking about कि हमारा future क्या होगा? How are we going to make our future? How are we going to make our career, family? Are we going to live here, or are we going to go and live in Canada and Australia or Europe or someplace else? तो उनका जो link है with this space or this place and this time, that is very weak, and they are not. So they are not concerned about history. They don't want to even know about history. Okay, and here, as an academic, I saw an academic at that time that we were saying Pakistan was formed in 1947. So they say, so what? It could have been formed in 1951, or it could have been formed in 1922. It doesn't really matter to them because they were not really thinking why that date is important. For them, the date is not important. For them, therefore, this whole question of identity as a Pakistani is not important. You see, they are looking forward to a new identity. They are looking forward to becoming a US citizen of Pakistan origin. They are not thinking of being a Pakistani as such. So, because this is where I saw this whole case of identity. And so the multiple identity is not just, okay, I'm a Pakistani or a South Asian or this. It is also in terms of time. It is not what I was, what are my roots, and what I am today and what I will be tomorrow. So there is this struggle in the youth कि हम कल क्या होंगे? It is not what I am today, but what do I want to be tomorrow? This is the question that the youth was asking. And you read the British Council report on Generation Next, and you will see that what are they thinking about. So I actually studied youth who their identity and their aspirations, who were engaged in criminal activities, who were engaged in political extremism, in religious extremism. And I said, what is it that they want? And how can this, and this society which has become so fragmented, and this is to answer Nasima's question, that we are fragmented, we are confused, because we are, before we speak, हम अपने आप को censor कर देते हैं. We restrict ourselves. We don't express ourselves fully. You see, this is the problem. So if you look at India, there is no inhibition. They are dancing freely. We cannot dance. You look at music, we are not singing. And so ये सारा literature, arts, everything, हम मंटो को नहीं पढ़ सकते, हम फैस को नहीं पढ़ सकते, हम even मुनीम न्याजी को नहीं पढ़ सकते. I mean, just think about it. It is amazing. आप किसी से पूछ लें शाह भिटाई का जो पूरा वो है, सुर है, तो who has read them? वो जो रिसालो है, who has read them? Why is certain sur sang at a certain time? Has anybody actually seen those sur being played? So I felt, दूसरी बात यह है कि people need to be given a capsule to swallow. ठीक है? We can't give this a 2 credit hour course. What can you do? So you need to give it. So I sort of packaged this as a tool where students can go to Mohenjo-daro, to the Kodiji Fort, to the Sakkar Barrage, to Shah Abdul Latif Bhattai Shrine, to Sevan, to go and see Mohenjo-daro, and to go to even वो जो Bhutto Sahib का मज़ार है, to Shikarpur and the clock tower in Sakkar. And so I said, just give them exposure. That's all. Let them be there and feel it. And each one will then feel it in their own way, and the exposure would actually give them, rather than give them lectures and lectures and talks and tell them about this architecture and that architecture, but that place itself, the architecture of Shah, or the architecture of Lloyd Barrage, or the architecture of Mohenjo-daro, being there will tell them what it is. So I feel the way to overcome this issue of multiple identities, the way to overcome this question of past or future and their importance, is to put the student, expose them to the real site. This is important. I think that, for me, is how I looked at it, trying to overcome this struggle of thing.
Actually, multiple identities was never a struggle. If I speak for myself, it was people not understanding those multiple identities was a problem with me. I've always embraced all identities. Maybe it can be called a psychological disorder in today's age and time, but I am fine with that. But what you said, Fazal Sahab, and what I think both Timur does, what we do in history group as well, and what then actually starting off with the idea of video tour in the first place, is that go to the site and learn from the site, or let the site speak to you. And that's where you'll find some ground of the identity that you've either lost or was orchestrated as a loss for you over a period of time, etc. and etc. And I think this is something that resonates with all of us who are sitting here as well, to go to the site and learn from the site. It's very important. But now I would take Timur and then Zain, and then close with Faria. So Timur, if you can provide your take on the also the probably we'll talk in the next session about the absence of the documentation and the importance of documentation and importance of publishing books. But I think that's something that we need to talk in the next session, although that sort of came in. But right now, let's just try and reconcile with the idea of multiple identities and not call it a psychological disorder.
It's been quite a wide range of discussion, and it's a difficult question. But I would put it this way, that there are also layers of identity, you see. There are certain layers which are even universal, obviously. That's why the whole world feels for Gaza. For example, as Faria said, it's one layer is not doesn't exclude the other layers. I think we need to also, and that also explains, for example, your own case, and all of us have that multiplicity of identities. It is just it's a challenge. It's an analytical challenge how to sort of make sense of it. But I would say, and therefore, once again, as Faria said, that we can learn from the whole globe certain universal, I'll just keep to architecture, universal principles. That's what I was trying to say, that the 6 contexts to which architecture responds is common to all architecture, and therefore we can learn, meaning to say, how is a building put together. You can learn from Vitruvius, as somebody said, and you can learn from, and so on and so forth for the other things. But one has to have some, I think we have to have a framework which distills out these various layers. I think that is a challenge which should be, and the list that I gave, there's some practical challenge, functional, but then there's another practical challenge, which is climate. And then there's the way the building is made. And third is the socio-cultural context. Then that becomes particular. You can't sort of give a blanket statement that the globe is, and we are living in a global village, so our local context is irrelevant. So just to have some discernment about these things, you just put everything, try to put everything in its place. For example, if I'm designing a mosque, it will have a stronger connection to the regional mosque architecture of where I'm designing. And there, just going into some specifics, their knowledge becomes very important. For example, if I'm looking at a piece of Mughal architecture, and then I see its canvas from, let's say, Humayun and Akbar, and as it comes down, and starting from Babur, and if I'm able to recognize that which forms, where they're coming from, generally speaking, they're coming from Central Asia, Samarkand, the Timurid Renaissance, and more particularly than their regional schools. For example, the Herat school, which is called the Second Timurid Renaissance, affects Thatta more, as some scholars have said. So if you, the more you know, you're able to recognize the elements, and then if that is the case, then X element in Mughal architecture, for example, if I know where it's coming from, then I can stretch my referent to Samarkand and Bukhara, for example. But that would be done in the context of the material context of what is available in Lahore. And similarly, if I know that the Safvid architecture too was rooted in Timurid architecture, then I'll know the common connection, and I can learn from the Safvid. And as they were doing, the medieval architects had no compunction in visiting sites, going places and learning. And why else would you find some of the multifold arches developed here, and then you can find that in Timurid architecture, and then you can find them even in Ottoman architecture in Turkey. So you don't know the answers. I don't know the answer, whether it came from Samarkand and went with the Turks here and there, or so there's some questions also. So I'm saying that if it should be based on awareness, and it's a continuous research and increasing your knowledge to be able to take educated and appropriate decisions. But this is one aspect of it. This is more the material aspect. For me, the essence of the whole search, the purpose, ultimate, that's another layer, which I call in search of the timeless in architecture. That timeless, once again, has a universal or a global appeal. I mean, why else would the most probably visited building in the world is Taj Mahal. So there is obviously a universal appeal. And so on and so forth. Meaning, so to say that now this is more to do with the ultimate communicative aspect of it. What am I trying to communicate through the use of symmetries or a certain grammar? If I'm aware of that, it opens up my creativity. Then I'm not copying forms. Charles Correa wasn't making Hindu temples, but he was aware that Indic architecture was deeply rooted in the Vastu Purush Mandala. You can criticize him for his distillation of it in his work. I'm just saying that one needs to be more aware of the various layers and also know what am I trying to do. And the same can be applied to myself. I would like to slightly push back on the sense that because we are a global citizen, we don't really need, that's old hat. Why do I need to study Farsi literature? I would say that once it really comes back to who am I? If ultimately I'm spirit, then I'll be looking for the spirit maybe in Meister Eckhart, the German mystic from the 13th century, or whoever. Then that expands my scope across time, across geography. Because from my perspective,
Timur, I have to cut you. We're sort of running short on time, but thank you.
Fine.
Got the exposure from Fazal Saab. I got awareness from you with respect to that answer, that where we are going, and Zain, and then we'll close with Faria. I'll try and squeeze in one comment or a question from the student body who's sitting here. So yes, Zain, but short and sweet.
Thank you, Rabela. Temur, I'm so sorry you were cut short because of me. I will keep it very, very short and hopefully be able to continue your sentence when we meet in law next week. Rabela, I will go back again to the problem of language and the imperialism of language. We have to, the words that we use today, greatness, monumental, we have to fix this. And why should monumental be this very obvious large building? Why can't the Baltid and Altid forts that are much smaller than any monumental modernist building that we know, but they withstand 7.5 Richter earthquakes? Yet we look at buildings built by IMP who are monumental, they are muscular, so steroid infused, they're unnecessarily sort of toxic masculine buildings. Why must we keep harking back to a language which is not culturally appropriate to us? Even in this conversation, I find myself jerking internally to words being used, references being used. I would much prefer to have this conversation without, Temur, with all due respect, without the reference to the Acropolis and without the reference to Vitruvius. and without the reference to Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man? Why are we constantly dependent on our conversations having to reflect and lean back on scales of pluralism, scales of inclusivity, which are not appropriate to us? We need to come back to understanding the scale that is relevant to us and focus on the politics of architecture and its social impact over millennia. It's very important to understand the human as an immersive entity in the built environment, not as we are continuing to speak about the pedagogy of architecture as isolated incidents. So I think our language is critical. And in terms of, can we be, yes, I would like to be a Sindhi Muslim, what was the third thing you described yourself? Sindhi Muslim woman?
Yeah.
Ravella, you had,
Yeah. Siddhi,
I'm perfectly happy.
Pakistani, and all of the rest that I can add, that I would like to add later.
So I'm very happy becoming a Sindhi Muslim woman just like you.
Yeah, English.
And I think that that's a genre we need to get into, understanding gender as experiences. Our education is so linear. It's so, again, myopic, I will say. We're not doing educational embodied experiences. Our pedagogical structure relevant to our people who want to touch artifacts, they are being put behind glass boxes. We're being told how to think and not being allowed how to feel. I think the purpose of feeling, the science of intuition, needs to come into pedagogical structures to decolonize and to reconstruct a new narrative without the words that we are using today. That would be my short and sweet for this fabulous conference. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Zain. And Faria, circling back to you after all of this. Although just a point I need to add, Zain, your editors need to be documented, oral histories need to be documented and published. One of the reasons we keep going back to Western, one of the reasons, not entirely, but monumental history and everything, is that they're published, they're republished, and we don't publish. Until and unless we publish, make it part of our curriculum. Teachers need books. We are not, it doesn't, and make it accessible, like make it online, make it accessible. That is one of the main things that I was thinking for the next session, that we talk about the importance of documentation. We travel, we don't write. Even I'm not writing, I'm not written a lot after things, multiple reasons for that, but producing books is very important. But we go back to Faria now. I'm sorry, I digress. Too many things in my head. But Faria.
I don't have much to say, just to reinforce whatever you're saying and the rest are. So yes, this identity thing, yes, I was reminded, of course, by, what the British experienced. I think this was really the British experience when they, and that happened on a daily basis in the new courthouses, that they would have someone in front of them and they would ask that subcontinental fellow or lady, who are you? So I think women or मेल तो नजर आ जाता था, लेकिन ये कि yes, I am Sindhi, I am Sheikh, I am from Karachi, I am this. So there were a lot of layers, and I think a lot of people like Bhumi Baba and others, they've written very eloquently on that. So this, I think, just reinforcing the aspect of having, of it being possible to have multiple identities and to occupy different roles. So I think I just reinforce that. Second important thing that Fazil mentioned, and I think we experience it in our own engagement with the youth also. And then of course, once you engage with the new youth, then you question the validity of the absence of any kind of, Western, so-called Western histories. Because I think the new the youth, especially within Pakistan, I mean, they're not looking at their future, within the country. And we have seen that in the past many years. So you don't want them to be at a disadvantage and not know anything about, what is considered, let's just say, a masterpiece elsewhere. But masterpiece is regardless of size. But I think at the end, I would like to say something very general about architecture, which is also an observation how architecture and also historical knowledge, I mean, because production of architecture owes more to what we call a process of imagineering rather than a creation of a work which most of the speakers have been asking for, is a rootedness in a physical materiality, and having being more connected to your being, which is situated in a context. And so, of course, in contemporary times, most of what we are engaged in is, plucking out images and putting them together. And even I think within the historical realm, we've come across, a hyper-real exaggeration of history which is reduced to its imagery. So I think this this quest of going to the site, which all three panelists have, or being in a space, they've all outlined that. That is, that interest or that that focus is renewed. Second, I think everybody kind of spoke about the limitations of language. Most certainly, yes. I think any kind of being, there is this being, having a being, and then putting a discursive frame on that being, whether it is within a human being or whether it's for architecture, that is problematic in itself. So I think good education, and perhaps good education or good practice as an architect kind of, I think, refocuses or puts the focus back at the being and kind of polishes the being and uses the discourse to kind of, to kind of, let's just say, chisel out or to polish the being, and whether it's materially or for the human self. So thank you.
Yes, Falsafi. We can stretch
You
to
know,
15
so
minutes.
one of the things which is common between Buddha and Mansur is that they both see that they both get nirvana sitting beneath a tree. So, जैसे तैमूर ने कहा ना, शेख सैयद से रिश्ता तोड़, स्कूल जा. I think for nirvana, you need to sit beneath a tree, not in a classroom. So, and the older the tree, the better.
Explanation is
If I may
some
quickly
explanation
jump in,
for those
Jamila.
in the audience who are not from our department. So that is Mansoor Saab is a very respected faculty member in our department, and you would often see him having his classes and engagement with students underneath that tree in our courtyard. Yeah.
Okay, start sayadar darak ki tarah hota hai. Do not forget that. Plus, I would want any one of you, the students who are sitting here, master students, the graduate, postgraduate students, and or bachelor students who are here, to just one comment or anything that you're taking away from here, or any insights you want to give us, because that will help us formulate the next session whenever we will be able to. So at least one, I would want one volunteer. We can have two as well, but one. डरने की कोई बात नहीं है. Graded assignment. nahi. It's not a graded assignment, so don't worry. Just one. Any, do you want to say something? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
So you talked about local, yeah, sorry. Okay, I'm Kuratulayan Jalali. I'm a practicing architect. I'm doing masters in urban planning currently from ND University. On account of that, actually, I'm attending the conference. So I would like to comment that you talked about multiple identities and how, provincial identities in Pakistan also, are deeply rooted in our culture. And I think we don't highlight that enough. And we don't highlight provincial histories so much as being I think it's a better situation in Lahore, where Punjabi as a language is so romanticized that they have more connection to architecture also, in art also, in history also. But in Sindh, I think we see that there is because of the diversity of population and a very, very colonial history of architecture, especially Karachi. And so I'm talking in the context of Karachi because most of the architecture universities are situated in Karachi and, in the vicinity of Karachi. And we have a very colonized history. And I was having a discussion with my colleagues the other day that, our history is just colonial, and that's why there is no sense of belonging to it, because जो हमारा जैसे अंदरून लाहौर की लोगों की belonging है, and क्योंकि वो उनका हमारा local culture है, it is not just colonial architecture. So that makes a big difference, and I think in education we need to highlight more about the provincial history of each of our provinces, which is not there. We spend a lot of time studying Greeks and Romans and Egyptians, and a very little time also in Indus Valley civilization actually. And we study a lot of the European masters, but there is probably because of the lack of publications, but there is no emphasis on Sindhi architecture or local Punjabi historical architecture, or that kind of Balochistan architecture or anything in that context. So I think that's why there is no sense of belonging also. As a practicing architect, I will also say that we always focus on what is going internationally and वहाँ पे क्या practice है, और हम उसी को replicate, उसकी एक सस्ती copy हम अपने मुल्क में बनाते हैं, तो उसकी वजह से architecture की भी कोई sense of belonging नहीं होती है हमारे region में. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Kuratulayan. And Anila wants to say something, and I also want to add just a little point that colonial heritage is our heritage. Please do not disassociate yourself with it. Please, we are trying to find tools to make that association. There's nothing wrong in studying classical Greek architecture, but just the disproportionality of it is something that we need to talk about. So I wanted to make that disclaimer. ऐसा ना हो जैसे सुअर मारते फिर रहे हैं वहाँ colonial buildings गिराना शुरू हो जाएं. We don't want to disown colonial heritage. And yes, Anila, in that, after that, we'll call it an end.
Yes, I do really want to respond to this one. Being a Karachiite, being involved with exposing our students with the history and heritage of the city, I think it is very important for us to understand that even though we call it as colonial architecture, but when our students go and experience it, and that has always been the emphasis when we take our students for our heritage conservation course documentation to these buildings, to understand what they are, to understand who built them, to understand who lived in them, and to understand the way they are planned, which is a response to the climate of the city. Don't look at it as something which is alien, which is a product of the colonial era. It is something that was built by our own people, and something that was lived in by our own people. When you look at these patterns in detail, there is so much there which is our very own. The only date that of construction may be from the colonial period, but the rest of it is all our own. The material, the way they are planned, the way they, the planning response to our cultural norms and values, everything is our own. So please do relate to it that way. The artisans, I mean, every part of it resonates things from our own region. So please don't look at them like that it's colonial and it's not ours. And that is what we want. And it's not just about Karachi's buildings, but also if you go out into rest of the cities of Sindh, our students have been to Shikarpur, they keep on going to other historic cities of Sindh. The only reason why we want to do this exposure for our students is to be able to ask yourselves this question, whether this is what we are or not, because that is what we are. That is what we are, where we are coming from. And even the architecture of Karachi is being tagged as colonial, but I find it very difficult to call it just colonial. It's very much, yeah. Yes, we need to get out of it and start relating with these things in many other ways, not just the time period in which it was built.
Thank you, Anila. So this sort of brings the myopia in as well, and the problem of the binaries that Faria was also sort of pointing towards, that East and West and all of that. How do we reconcile is the thing. Just one comment or a question from DS faculty, Anam. I'm so happy that she's asking, and we've stirred her enough to ask this.
Okay,
And then
thank you. I am Anam Mufti. I am a DS faculty. I'm not an architect, so I want to give that heads up first. We're talking a lot about what history is, why it should be studied. It's important to understand, if we do not teach our kids to criticize the history and things around why they are created, they will never really question anything that comes into existence. Right? So it's important, history should be criticized. History is nothing without criticism, because it's just a story that is being told from one person's perspective, and that needs to be questioned. Once you put that inside a student, once that seed is inside, I think they will want to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you, Anam. It's a valid point. And criticize does not mean criticism that way. It's critically looking at it rather than criticizing it that you do on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. One more question, ma'am, please mention your name. And then we'll definitely call it a close, because the equipment has to go to our main venue and the organizers will kill me.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Rabia Pibash. I am from SEPS University, Jamshoro. मैम, मेरा बस एक सिंपल सा सवाल है, क्या हमारी जितने भी हेरिटेज है हमारे कल्चर को रिप्रेजेंट करता है? नंबर वन, कल्चर ही है जिसमें से नहीं सर, एक थोड़ा सा सवाल मैम, कल्चर है, लिसन टू मी, ठीक है? नहीं मैम देखें, नहीं उनकी बात को थोड़ा सा मैं थोड़ा सा हाईलाइट करना चाहूंगी। जब स्टूडेंट्स हमसे ये सवाल पूछते हैं तो हमारी जितनी भी रिलेटेड हेरिटेज बिल्डिंग्स हैं, देखिए मैम, कल्चर से आर्किटेक्चर निकलता है, लेकिन हमारी जितनी भी हेरिटेज बिल्डिंग्स है ना, वो हमें एडॉप्शन दिखाती हैं दूसरे कल्चर्स की। मतलब वहां पे हमारा कल्चर कम है, लेकिन हमने दूसरे कल्चर्स की एडॉप्शन ज्यादा की हुई है। आप कितनी भी हेरिटेजेस की बिल्डिंग ले लें, मुगल आर्किटेक्चर को आप देख लें सर, ठीक? अब जब स्टूडेंट हमसे ये सवाल करते हैं कि हाउ वी कैन रिप्रेजेंट आवर कल्चर, हमें कोई ऐसे एग्जाम्पल बताएं, तो जस्ट गिव मी वन एग्जाम्पल किसी ऐसी हेरिटेज की कि जिससे हम उनको ये बता सकें कि ये हमारे कल्चर को रिप्रेजेंट करता है। क्योंकि कल्चर है जिसमें से आर्किटेक्चर निकलता है, और कल्चर को ही हम चेंज कर सकते हैं अगर हम किसी और जगह का आर्किटेक्चर अडॉप्ट करते हैं। सो जस्ट इस चीज को थोड़ा सा डिस्कशन में लाया जाए तो बेहतर है नेक्स्ट उसमें। लेकिन एग्जैक्टली मैम,
like to mention an example. We'll go out this door. We'll look at the back at the DJ college facade. And there's a very nice ionic pilaster. If you look at it from the top, it's ionic, and from the bottom of it, you can see a lotus coming out.
Yes, yes.
So I think that I just wanted to quote this one example. So that's like, so what you see, I think what Anila was also referring, then you see a combination of our culture exhibited in the material culture. So we'll go there, I think, after this.
Call it a close, but ma'am, your question was very good, that what is our culture and what culture to adopt and what not. We'll probably take an iteration of that, hopefully in the next session. But just one thing, our culture is as much a Buddhist stupa as the ruin of Mohenjo-daro, as the Baltit fort, as the Altit fort, as the colonial remains that are there, and hence it is much more plural. We have to reconcile with it rather than the so we have cultures, and there's no one culture. There cannot be one culture. There cannot be one identity. There never is. Even God has 99 multiple diverse facets, and we agree to that as Muslims. We read them as Muslims. So I think we need to open up and absorb everything, and then we will reconcile. Thank you. Thank you for being here, everyone. Tea is ready. Let's have tea. And we can continue the discussion during the tea as well with the panelists. Sorry, Timur and Zain, we have to call it a goodbye. I'll call you both and have a session separately.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, yes, yes.
Khuda Hafiz.
Timur and Zen, this is Anila. Thank you so much for taking time for this. This was a very interesting discussion, और इंशाल्लाह आप लोगों के साथ मजीद और deeper sessions हम रखेंगे.
Inshallah. बहुत शुक्रिया. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you very much.
बहुत
I would like
Thank
to
you so much.
both of you, but maybe sometime in another place we will be face to face. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments also.
Thank you, Rabela. Thank you for the invitation. Demo, great seeing you. Thank you so much.
Continued with this.
Hafiz.
Thank you. Bye. I'll see you both. I'll talk to you both, inshallah.